Cool. We are live. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, and happy Halloween wherever
Happy
you are in the world.
Happy Halloween.
You have got me. Today I'm Dr. Paul, hopefully kind of curing some programming ails, and we have Anonymous with us.
And I can't really see. This mask is now falling down. I think I've got it. Oh, there
Do
we
you
go.
think,
That's better.
do you think
Yeah.
that that's a general problem that Anonymous have as a hacker group, is that they just sit there with those masks on and go like, I can't see a damn thing while I'm trying to record this video?
Yeah, it's amazing how they get any work done wearing masks all the time,
Oh, it could be deep and philosophical. Aren't we all wearing masks, Pete, while we're at work?
Yeah. I suppose we are, aren't we?
Yes. Anyway, welcome everyone. Hello to those, excuse me, joining us on LinkedIn for the first time. We are live both on YouTube and LinkedIn. We have doubled our channels, Pete. We're taking over the internet slowly but
That's right.
surely.
This is Moore's law of live streaming, right?
Yeah. Every like 6 months or every 3 episodes, we'll just double the number of channels again. So
Okay, I'm gonna. I didn't know how long I was gonna last with the mask on, but
I'll be honest, the stethoscope is really irritating me around. Like, I'm not like I have a wedding ring, and that is the only jewelry I wear. And anything more, like a wedding ring and a watch, and anything more than that, I'm just like, get off of me.
Yeah, I had this. You know what I was looking for is
Yeah.
my kids had this amazing like freaky clown mask that was just like a half mask.
Okay.
And so like it would have been a really good thing for this, but alas. I'm guessing, because those like cheap plastic masks, when you've had them for about 10 years, they start to degrade and like start to go back to the petrochemical constituents that they were formed from. And my guess it was probably something like that, where we'd fished it out of the bottom of the Halloween box one year and been like, this has to go.
Yeah.
So,
Your wife was there being like, this is 4 pieces that was one mask together. And
yeah. Those high quality holiday and like Halloween decorations. So yeah.
Cool.
So it goes.
So this is our Halloween episode. But apart from the wonderful decorations, and you can see Pete has his pumpkins, his skulls, and his little. Has the rat got a name?
Oh, we should name the rat. I agree. Let me think on that. But I have to come up with some suitably like trailhead character like name.
Oh, so Ratty's not going to do it for you then.
Ratty. I'd almost go more with like, because there's like Cody, then you could have like Rhodey, like short for rodent, maybe.
Okay.
So Rhodey the rat.
Rhodey the rat. And what's Rhodey's speciality then? Like, because obviously, I mean, Ruth is the architect, and like Cody's the developer, and
so I'm gonna say really bad with these. Rhodey is the master of unbulkified code.
Master of them. Oh wow, he's Rhodey just does the quickest and easiest hacky job and gets out of it.
Yeah.
Goes in, gets
swarm paid. A swarm of roadies can like deliver your project in like record short time, but you'll regret it 2 months later.
Yes, we've all met those. All met those teams. So I'm going to apologize as well. We've had a couple of weeks off because I was ill with COVID, which was not fun, and Pete was busy traveling around the globe.
We were trying to reschedule for last week, and then I was the one who pulled the plug on that. I forget. No, I think we had we just had workers at the house that were going to be walking in and out of this room. So
I mean, let's be fair. It was me that messed around with it for being ill, and so I still have the cough. So apologies. I will be muting myself as much as possible so that you don't all have to hear me cough down your ears. But we'll see what we can do. So, where were we up to, Pete?
So last time around, we had.
Shall I share some code on screen?
Yeah, it'd probably be a good idea to start getting that up. We had actually, it's really probably a good idea to. I had this idea, and then I didn't bring it up before we started streaming, of like kind of showing the initial trigger implementation. Do we still have that at a checkpoint in the GitHub
Oh,
repo?
yes, we do. I think. Oops, bring that back up. I think we are on. Let me just go back here.
I mean, I think for people who, are now first tuning in for the first time and missed that first episode.
Here you go.
just-
Here is that's the trigger handler there. That's not the right one. Let me go back to, let me open up GitHub and do that. I'm just going to switch here. We should have it somewhere. If not, we can find something similar to talk about. Where are we?
Anyways, while Paul's doing that, so just to recap for everybody. So we started out episode 1 and we wrote a trigger because that's what you do. And triggers very much look like this could be a bunch of code that you can just go and implement, and you can write your code right in there. Functionally, that will work, but that has problems with scaling, with future revisions, technical debt, all those kinds of things, where and potential conflicts if you have multiple triggers on the same object, where you can't control order of execution. So the whole goal of this was to take that raw trigger and looks like the skull fell. So the sticky thing I put up on that pane of glass apparently didn't work as well as I'd hoped. All right. Well, sorry about that, skeleton.
I'm sure it's. Do you know why? Do you know why the skeleton wasn't going to the dance beat?
I don't know why the skeleton wasn't going to the dance.
It had nobody to go with.
It had no body to go with.
Yeah. I told people there would be terrible jokes and they may be Halloween themed. So
I'm terrible at remembering jokes, so you'll have to be the source of that. So so we then refactored. Sort of the first stage of refactoring was creating a trigger handler, and a trigger handler is an Apex class. Apex class that basically you execute your trigger. There's minimal amounts of code in the trigger code block itself. And then the handler class actually goes in. Oh, there we go. There's our first task trigger.
Yeah, so this is our very first original trigger we started off with. Excuse me, way back when, some stuff. And then if I go back to the commits, we can see down here that we added in some tests, and I think this was our episode 2 update where we added in our trigger handler. Here we go.
There we go. Sorry.
Okay.
So there we go. So the trigger handler, actually, do you want to go and show the trigger, like what that becomes from what it was?
You mean the actual trigger class?
The actual trigger. No, the trigger. There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. There we go.
So basically, you remove all that code, and you just call handler dot after insert, or handler dot after update. So there we go. So that greatly simplifies the logic in the actual trigger code itself, which is what you want. Like I said, triggers they don't make a great place. There's a lot of restrictions on the code you can write in triggers. There's I forget all the restrictions, but like one example is that you can't write static members of a trigger, and I think that's because triggers are executed kind of in a static block. Or there's like the way triggers are actually executed in the underlying infrastructure of Salesforce kind of prohibits that according to the rules of Apex, from my recollection. So there we go. So now we're at this point where we have this trigger handler. And the goal of this episode is to get us to the point where we go from a trigger handler, which is better. And, I would say there may be cases in a project for a relatively simple implementation where if you're rushed to get it out the door and your client maybe isn't going to pay you for a lot of time to implement a trigger framework, and you literally have a couple of triggers that you need to get out the door, probably doing them with a trigger handler is going to be just fine. It's not perfect, but I would say, like, think ahead. If you expect that this is going to go beyond that at some point in the not too distant future, then yeah, go ahead and actually use a trigger framework. But there, we all know those Salesforce customers where they just need a little bit of something, and that's going to probably do them for a long time. So why not just throw a trigger handler on that problem and get it out the door for them?
Yeah,
Um,
pragmatism's got to be a key part of like a lot of this. Is if you're doing, excuse me, if I was working in a situation with a customer where they had one trigger, I
mhm,
mean, this would be a fine place to leave it in. Anyone who comes in here sees that it's got structure, knows they can work with it. They can move this to a framework if they wish to fairly
right.
easily. But like, you don't have to implement the framework just because you need to. There's the KISS principle of everything. Just keeping it simple.
Yeah. Although I know some people who would totally disagree with me. So if you're one of those people, like, please disagree with us. The whole point of this live stream is to help people who are newer to developing in the Salesforce platform kind of get a better sense of how the proper way is to do things. And, I would say nobody has a monopoly on the one right way to do things. So if you disagree, post it in there. That'll be great for that up and coming Salesforce developer to read and to form their own opinion. Win them over to your side. If you think we're wrong, I'm totally open to that.
Yeah, I think there's one of the things that's important, I think, for people to understand about development in particular is that there are definitively wrong answers. There's not always necessarily a single right answer. And this is one of those things where, I know a bunch of people, Pete, just like you mentioned, who would tell me they'd call me names and remove my developer card from me and all sorts of things, um, because
Revoked.
revoked. You are no longer a developer. How dare you? Because I say don't always implement a trigger handler framework, but I think that with every piece of development you're doing, you have to understand your audience and who you're doing it for.
Mhm.
If I've got a product on the App Exchange that has triggers in it, that uses a trigger framework because it's an App Exchange product and it needs to scale and work. When
Yeah.
I've worked on some orgs, that are much larger instances, hundreds of users, trigger framework, a number of developers, trigger frameworks are perfect.
Mhm.
When I've worked on a small non-profit instance where I've got a single before or a single after insert trigger, then this kind of setup is exactly what that customer needs just to get them up and running.
And that's actually that was exactly the use case I had in my mind is, maybe you do some pro bono work or some, highly discounted work for a nonprofit. And it's not like you want to give them short shrift on like a good implementation, but you can give them a good enough implementation and save each other's time, as far as that goes.
I think the other thing that kind of I don't think people understand enough is that when you leave something there, and sorry, I've just realised the code's quite small, so let me just increase that so it's a bit
There we
more
go.
legible, hopefully for people. If that's good enough, is when you leave a pattern or a framework in an environment, when you leave anything in an environment, you are telling the next person how to work.
Hmm.
And the more opinionated you are, the less wiggle room that person has.
Yeah.
Now, there's often that joke, isn't there, about how all consultants are like. It's like when you get a plumber around, or when you get someone around your house, and you say to them, "I just need this thing doing," and they do that. They go, "What cowboy did you have in here last
Yeah,
time? Oh,
exactly. Like
oh
what?
who's done this?" Like,
I've had so much of that with this house.
yeah, exactly. Like everyone gets it. It happens to everyone. And what's worse is if you're the cowboy that did it, you did like a quick job yourself before, like, trying to get something else. What idiot did this? I don't know, not me. But like when you go into a customer's org, sorry, they have that if they get another team in, if it's an internal developer, if it's a consultant, whatever it might be, if it's an app provider, you are applying a restriction on that person's ability to develop in the way they want to. Now,
Right.
a trigger handler framework is one thing that I think very few people are going to come in and go, "Oh, that's a terrible idea. Which idiots put a trigger handler framework in here?" But it's really important you're aware of these things because it does restrict the flexibility of the system, and you need to just kind of think what's the fairest option. If you're doing a 6-month big implementation project, then you know what, patterns, frameworks, and things like that are going to be much more important because you're building something which is going to need a different level of documentation, different level of governance, a different level of review and practice. If you're just doing a quick bit of pro bono work or helping, like, I've helped about 30 different charities just get set up where all I've done is I've said to them, here's how you capture accounts, here's how you capture contacts, here's how you do leads, here's how you record donations. And they might want a couple of extra fields, and I'll just do, a couple of little triggers to help them do things if they need to. Like, you don't need to. I don't need to go and put enterprise patterns in there. That is not going to help them, and it's going to mean that if they do want someone to come in and really help them in the future, that like I've then got stuff they're going to have to unpick.
Yeah, and that person needs to go and learn that. There's another thing that occurred to me because so I've been helping one of my clients with a blog post about so Aiden Harding, who's a
Superstar.
yeah, I mean he's done a lot of great work around the community. He actively speaks at events. He's super smart, and he knows Salesforce inside and out, and he has a PhD in computer science, so he knows just computing inside and out. And he wrote a new trigger framework recently. And so why did he bother doing that? Well, basically, there's a new feature that was introduced, and I'm trying to just look up. So there's something called an Apex type implementer. I don't even know what it does, but basically, a new feature was introduced into Apex that meant he found what he thought could be a better way to write a trigger framework that was configurable, but configurable sort of in code and not having to use custom metadata types, I think was the thing that he was after. So so it kind of behaved like some of the trigger frameworks that use custom metadata types as far as the configurability, but didn't have to actually have the overhead of implementing and packaging a custom metadata type in order to make it work. So that was kind of his goal. But it wasn't possible before this Apex type implementer feature that was introduced to Apex recently. So if, whatever you're choosing to implement is state of the art today, but 6 months from now, you don't know what's going to be added to the language or the framework that you're using. And so you might be locking somebody into today's technology when if you don't need the features that the framework gives you, why bother, right?
Yeah.
You're basically liberating someone else to potentially do better, in the future.
There's completely. Like that makes perfect sense. I'm just trying to find the link for Aiden's blog post because I know which one you're on about, and it was a very, very good post.
So he posted it on LinkedIn, and like the blog, it's going to go out as a blog on the Processity blog that's about to be launched. So Processity is his current ISV that he works for.
Yeah, I'll just post the link to the LinkedIn one in the chat for everyone.
Yeah. So
I didn't realize
there's a principle in that, which I forget. There's like a particular term for that, as far as delaying making a decision until the latest possible moment.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's like a very agile principle, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like whatever you can do to delay making a call, you do so.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that should now be for anyone who's on the on the stream. You should be able to see that in the comments. I'll just post it into the comments on LinkedIn as well, as apparently that didn't come through there. Sorry, 1 second. Aidan's article on triggers. Yeah, and one of the things that you've just made me think of there, which is kind of a thing that I've heard and said a few times, which is that any code you write is tech debt.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even if you think that you've written like, I'm going to say the core Google search page rank algorithm for the first time ever, or something of that importance, as soon as you've finished it, it's tech debt for someone else.
Yeah.
And you can have a good framework. It can be something that's going to help people in the long run, but it's tech debt someone has to work with or around. And that's a key thing. I don't know what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Or I don't know. Could you say it's in a quantum superposition of both not technical debt and technical debt until it becomes technical debt? I mean,
that's kind of like the way I view all my code is it's both working and not working until someone actually goes in anywhere near it and touches it.
There we go. Yeah, it's Schrodinger's method.
Yeah, I feel like most of my code is Schrodinger's, or most of my coding life is Schrodinger's coding life, which is I am both a genius and a moron at this exact same time.
In some other timeline, I'm a moron, but damn, I feel good right now.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, you feel good right now, and then literally 2 seconds later, you're like, no, I'm a complete.
Yeah, awesome.
Cool. So the other thing we did at the end of the last episode is we did a bit of refactoring to use aggregate results, and
which was fun.
Yeah, and I'm going to take the blame for this one because I think it would be fair to say that I pushed for us to use the aggregate result option, just as an idea. Mainly because I really like aggregate results. They're just one of those things I don't think enough people use enough. But we were getting an error where some of our tests were failing, and the reason being that I have figured out is that so what we were doing, let me just go back to the test that was failing. It was this test here at the bottom, the deletion test. Okay, so we had a single open task. We deleted it. We then reran our aggregate query, and we were getting 1 still. It wasn't updating. And what I figured out was, after I wasn't having people watch me and had 2 seconds to go away and get your mind on it, was that you do not get a response from the aggregate result if there is nothing there to work with. So when we were searching for tasks here, if we have no tasks that meet this criteria, we won't get a result for this grouping. So we're grouping by the what ID, right? So by the account ID. If there are no tasks for that account, we are, not going to get a returned aggregate row here. And so in the original loop we were doing, we would never be re-updating the account. So what I've done here is added in another little loop that just takes the aggregate results and puts them in a map using the account ID so that we can work with them there. And then I've used our wonderful, forgive me for forgetting the name of this here, but a null coalescing operator is the word I think I'm looking for. Is that correct? You're on mute, Pete.
There we go. Yes, I'm 99% sure that's also that's called a null coalescing operator.
Yes. So we use that to just say if we can't find the account ID, the account in that map, then it's going to be 0 because it has no row returned. Otherwise, we use the value, and everything works wonderfully. Going to do my favorite thing, little dopamine
just
here.
A quick look up and it can validate that is the proper name for that.
If not, we'll give it a different name. But there you go. Look, the tests are passing. I get my dopamine here. Everyone's a happy bunny.
There we go.
And we are now in the Schrodinger superposition of being a genius. And give it half an hour, and we will be morons again. Less than half an hour, probably. Why can where I've zoomed in, I can't find that. Anyway, cool. So we're all up to date and all working. What we're going to do now is some object-oriented magic to actually take this and make it into a more generic framework. And what we've got in this task trigger handler here is a pretty generic setup. We have 4 methods. Well, we have 3 methods we could use. We have after insert, after update, and after delete, because they're the only ones we're implementing. That most triggers are probably going to have 1 or 2 of those. Typically, if you have an after update, you've probably got an after insert as well. I find, because you're doing something after a record is created or changed. And so if we had a new kind of requirement to go in and do something on the account, we could go through this entire process again. And if anyone wants to watch back the 4.5 hours that have got us to this point to get just this setup, you can do so. You can probably skip some of my ranting and some of the terrible jokes we've had in there, but you could go away each time. Say again, sorry.
And my bad coding.
But
what am I supposed to type here?
Yeah, skip through us not knowing what we're doing.
There you go.
But you could go away and do this every time. However, that is not what we want to do, and we're going to assume that we want to do something a bit more useful. So, what we really want to do here is find a way of having a generic trigger handler. And I'm using the term trigger handler here. I know when we were discussing this, Pete, we had a bit of a conversation around, is it a trigger handler? Is it a trigger framework? Is it a trigger handler framework? Is it, variety of names? But we want to come up with this generic trigger handler thing we're going to use so that the next time we have one, next time we have a trigger we want to work with, we can very quickly go in and do the following, where we just say, great, our trigger. We could create our trigger and it just kind of have a simple pattern. And after that, we could just kind of, do the actual implementation in our class and just get running quickly without having to do a lot of the refactoring work we needed to there.
Right. Yeah.
So, excuse me for coughing down the microphone there.
And I'm a little curious, thinking of how far you can abstract this. At some level, you could have like a single, essentially trigger handler that is the jumping off point for everything in the framework. And that's what you're going to want, so that you essentially, if you're going to implement triggers or trigger logic for a new object, maybe you need to add the trigger code and then the invocation of that sort of one single entry point method, but then everything downstream from there is handled like that's it. That's the only object specific code you ever have, or object specific single code artifact that you ever have is that trigger, and then everything else is just something else in the framework.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what's interesting for us to look at here is when we look at how we extract things into kind of an object-oriented structure, we have effectively 3 options for doing inheritance and object-oriented kind of magic in Salesforce. And apologies for anyone who's listening in who actually is kind of, a hardcore computer science nerd who is hearing me butcher terms such as inheritance and object-oriented magic and just throw them around willy-nilly. But we could have an interface, we could have an abstract class, and we can have a virtual class. And as with everything in this structure, there's not really a right or a wrong answer, as far as I'm aware. I mean, there's an answer we're going to go with, but there's no real wrong one. I mean, have you heard the phrase, program code against an interface? I think, what's the phrase? There's something, you can tell that we've program against interface is not an implementation. When you're reading design pattern books, it's they often say code against interfaces or program to interfaces, not to implementations. And have you heard that before? Or
Uh, it rings a bell, but I mean, honestly, I read it. Program to an interface is not an implementation. I don't know. I feel like I'd have to read more to understand what they're talking about. I mean, and this is kind of a little bit my, uh, you know, uh, I sometimes struggle when things get very deep into the weeds of, or almost philosophical about like what, how um, object oriented concepts or, computing concepts, how they get talked about. Um, I feel like there's kind of a code and like I need someone to decode it for me often. I didn't study any computer science, and everything I've learned I've taught myself, which means I'm sure there's a lot of like really core computing concepts that, I just sort of gloss over because I've always just had a nice clean API that I can go and implement something, So I know that I miss that a little bit. Anyway, there's me just going on, but like, so what does that mean? I guess is
So
what I'm getting at.
again, I'm similar to yourself in that I am self-taught and not you know not educated, and that's a very general point for me in that I'm just not educated about many things. But what it means is that instead of you trying to come up with a concrete implementation for something, so
Mhm.
let's say we are creating. I'm going to use shapes because I'm a boring person. But let's say we are building a. In fact, you and I were talking earlier about programming video games, right? And I was
Yeah,
saying that
yeah, yeah.
so let's say that we are programming we're programming a very simple version of like Pong or something like,
Okay.
or Space Invaders, some game where we have a number of things on the screen,
Right.
and those things can change color, they can move, and they have different shapes. And
Mhm.
I'm pretty sure on like Space Invaders and things like that, you have different shaped bad guys that kind of
Yep,
have different
definitely.
levels of
I
health.
remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is technical. This is it. Different shape, colors, and bad guys. There we go. So I'm looking forward to that Harvard, studying and lecturing position coming right up.
I can see your Turing Award already materializing.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Nobel Prize. Here we come. So the so rather than going out and creating uh, a system that needs to work with a circle and a square and a triangle and a rectangle or whatever. Similarly, this could equally apply to if we were building a new version of like a vector drawing app or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
What we would do is rather than say, okay, I'm going to create a class called circle and a class called rectangle and a class called square,
Yeah.
and my system needs to go, if this is a rectangle, do this. Else, if it's a square, do this. Else, if it's a circle, do this. Else, if it's a n-sided a dodecahedron, do this or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What we would do is we would create an interface called shape that would have a set number of methods on it that everything's going to work with. So move and change color and reduce hit point or whatever it might be. And we would then create classes that implement that interface.
Mhm.
And then our code wouldn't care whether it was or shouldn't care whether it's a circle, a square, a octagon, or whatever. It will just work against that. And so the idea is that you are coding against that interface that you're going to work with rather than a concrete implementation, because that means that the actual concrete implementation can change and you don't care about it. And it's really kind of it's API based development. The idea is that if Salesforce changes the internal guts of how let's take just the standard REST API for running a query, right? You pass in a query string, Salesforce runs a query and returns you the results.
Right. Yeah.
That's a well-established API. If Salesforce decide to go away and change the entire underlying database, rewrite the query parser and everything else, but keep the API the same, you
Yep.
should know no difference.
Right.
It
So
shouldn't work.
maybe, underneath Salesforce, we all know Java is what's running under there. And so probably they're using some call out Java package that, and they decide actually there's a better one that we could go use that now has better favor, it has better performance characteristics, it's more secure, whatever. We shouldn't know the difference between that. So I guess it's still like the wording, like oh, I see. Okay. I was just misreading it. Program to an interface, not an implementation. Yeah. Okay. That totally.
And I
Yeah.
really, just as an
Sometimes I need
aside,
to
the
read
reason
something like 5 times and then it's like it sinks in. So yeah. Or
I mean, what I was just going to
like,
say is the other
yeah.
thing that's interesting to note there is that kind of API example. I want to give myself credit for a genius moment there, because I read that there's a really detailed post out by Srini. I'm going to butcher his name, so I'm not going to try. But it's on the Salesforce Architects page. It's a complete platform overview. It's like 200,000 words, and I was reading it earlier.
Well, is it one of the like engineering leadership people?
Yeah.
Srini Talapragada?
That's the man. That's
Everyone
that's
just
the
calls
person.
him Srini, but yeah.
Yeah. So but in there he talks about the fact that they, as part of the Hyperforce move, moved to a new database called Salesforce DB, which is an extended version of Postgres. Now,
Yep.
for years, Salesforce ran on Oracle, and as far as I was aware, still did predominantly, until I read that post the other day. And so this is a perfect example of Salesforce have literally changed one of the core fundamental underlying parts of the system. And as far as I'm aware, no one knows.
It's really cool they're finally talking about that.
That
change is like 6-7 years old since they started.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. I can only imagine how long that took. I'm really
like
pleased.
Those first started rolling out like 6-7 years ago. That's awesome.
As a kind of a side story, I remember the year there was the Dreamboat at Dreamforce.
Yes, I feel like we've talked about Dreamboat at least one other time, but yes, the Dreamboat.
Yeah, but just for everyone else, Salesforce one year had a cruise ship where you could stay for Dreamforce, and it was called the Dreamboat. Obviously, Peter was there as the other Dreamboat that was wandering around the conference. So yeah, but there was the MVP party on the Dreamboat, and there were a few Salesforce high-level execs that turned up, including someone who was very senior on the technical team. I may or may not have told this story beforehand, but basically, I'd had a couple of beers. I'm pretty sure you were there, Pete, and I probably had a couple of beers with me.
I didn't get invited to those as a.
Did you not?
Yeah, as a lowly developer relations.
I could have sworn you were there. Anyway,
no, I have been to some of the MVP parties. You're right, but not that one.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
Anyway,
that was never consistent. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So anyway, and I sort of basically this exec came down, sat down with a couple of beers, and there was me, and I think it was like Kevin Poorman was there, and let's be honest, like I think I was sat with Keir, Kevin, and Nup, basically all the nerdy guys in the corner, somewhere. Like, sorry for any of those guys that listen, but you know what brush you're tarred with, and you know exactly what we're like. So we were all sat there in the corner, and yeah, this exec guy who we knew came over, sat down with us, and he just said, "Right, I've had a couple of beers. None of what I say, and you're all under NDA. None of what I say can ever be released. What questions do you want to ask me, and I can give you sort of rough answers." And I was like, "Right." And I said, "So is it true you guys are migrated to Postgres?" And he was like, "Oracle are a very valuable partner, but it's really important to note that we are the biggest Postgres contributor in the world." And I was like, "Wow." And he was like, "Yep." And that was it. And it was he was very, very engaging, very good, told a lot of good information. But yeah, it was just brilliant. It was like, none of you can say a damn thing about what I say here, and I'll just deny all of it. So
yeah, that's like I love that you can actually talk about it now, because it was around that time that they hired, I think, like someone who was like one of the top 5 contributors to the original Postgres open source project. And so it was like, if you looked at what was going on, you'd be like, okay, clearly Salesforce are doing something with Postgres.
Yeah, well, it was a big
something
Heroku
big with Postgres, right?
Yeah, well, it was also Heroku is a huge Postgres user, so it wasn't a surprise in many areas, but yeah, it was just I will never forget just that kind of blunt stare down of a bunch of nerds that were very excited, just be like, "You can't say any of this. Like, none of this is
Yeah,
repeatable."
I
Uh,
I I don't think I can. I'm going to be cautious and not share this, but the internal name for that Postgres project was pretty cool too. So
oh, well, that's a. I mean, I'm not. I've probably told people before who the guy was who I spoke to on a stream or a video recording.
yeah,
So, but and he no longer works at Salesforce, so it's fine. But
okay.
like, it was, yeah.
Let's just say
Anyway,
the internal project name was a bit of a thumb your nose at Oracle.
oh, I can imagine. I can only imagine.
I'll leave it at that.
Uh,
God.
okay, so we're coming up with trigger handlers though. Like,
Trigger
we're
handlers.
41 minutes in, and we have yet to write a
When
single
your
line of
data
code.
on its way to that Postgres database.
Yes. So, so we could do an interface. The other option we have is to do. Salesforce has abstract classes and it has virtual classes. This is where I always fall down as well because I have to go away and check every time what the difference is. But in
It's a
my
good thing we did
checking,
before the live stream.
exactly, here's Blue Peter style, one I prepared earlier. So abstract classes are classes that can never be instantiated by themselves. Yes, that's correct. You cannot create an instance.
Yeah, the way that I
Yeah,
like
yeah,
mechanically, I always think of it is like you are not allowed to call new on that
yes.
class.
That is exactly it. So you cannot call new on an abstract class. It is purely abstract. And an abstract class can have abstract methods, which are methods where you define, excuse me, the signature, similar to an interface, but you cannot have a concrete implementation.
Right.
Virtual classes are a class that you can extend and you could call new on if you wish to, but more importantly, allow you to have virtual methods which you can then have a concrete base implementation for, but override that.
Exactly.
And for
Yeah.
that reason, we are going to be using a virtual class with virtual methods here. So we're going to have a class which we're going to create now. Let's actually create a class. Look at us.
Sounds good.
Trigger handler. And we'll spell handler properly as well, because that was about to be embarrassing, wasn't it? Voila. So first thing we'll do is make it virtual. And then, whoops, I'm going to remove that. And we're going to save. And this gives us our core trigger handler class that we're going to work with. Now,
Okay, now I need to refresh my project so I can see that.
okay. Let me know if you need a new
Nope, I'm
link
good.
as well.
I'm there.
So the next thing we're going to want to do is think about what we're typically going to want in our trigger handler class. So I think we're going to want a method that's probably something like that, where we're going to do a before insert that's going to do nothing because it's empty. And we're probably going to want another one. And prizes for anyone that guesses what this is going to be. And then we're going to do some copy pasta. Look at us coding together in live. So I'll trigger before insert before update, before delete, after insert, after delete. And we'll do, do you want to add one in for after undelete as well?
We're going to do undelete too? Okay, we'll do
Yeah,
that.
well, we'll do it because we're doing doing the broader framework.
Oops. Oh, yeah, okay, of course.
So what we've done here is created a very basic outline for our kind of trigger handler. Okay. And so if we save that now, as you can see, it tells us we're going to get some wonderful PMD errors saying that you've got empty methods, empty block
Angry
statements.
yellow PMD.
Yes. So for those who aren't familiar with PMD, it's a plugin that kind of reviews your code and gives you suggestions on the way. Some of them you'll obviously want to enforce, others you'll ignore completely because it's an empty block for a reason. It's fine. So that's that's I think a great starting position. So let's go over to our task trigger handler and look at what we would do to implement this. So first thing we would do is update our definition here to say that it extends trigger handler. And
Ooh,
what this does is this is going to tell the compiler, but also tells us that we have these methods open to us and available to us. Okay. What we're then going to do is add in a magic keyword here. Okay, public override. Now, I'm going to let's just do that on our 3 methods, and then we're going to look at a problem we've got. Because the problem we've got now is, if I go back here to our trigger handler, you'll see that there is no parameters we're passing into the handler, okay, for any of the methods. But here, we have parameters being passed in. So this gives us an interesting quandary or conundrum for us to really think about here. Now, the reason we have these like this at the moment is because we worked very hard to abstract away the knowledge that we are in a trigger, didn't we? We don't want the thing to know about it. That said,
and then some of it also is, I think what I would say best practice in object-oriented programming would be to pass the reference to the thing that you want to do something with, even though a trigger handler running in a trigger context does have access to the trigger variables.
Yeah.
You don't want to write the code assuming that it's there.
No, exactly. So
then it looks kind of magical to somebody looking at that class, like, where did that trigger thing come from?
Exactly, yeah. So I think we've got an interesting option now. So we could go away and we could rework this here so that these have the relevant trigger context variables coming in.
Right.
Or what we could do is go into the trigger handler and have it so that our trigger handler knows what we've got with our context variables. And so there's really no right way or wrong way here.
Are you saying like in the implementation of a constructor?
Yes. So in our constructor, we would effectively say, well, so we've got 2 choices. We could either have it in a constructor here.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And what we would do is we would say we could have, and it could be private. So private list s object, new records, old records, new record map. So we could define this as such. And then all we would come in here and do is say new records equals trigger dot new, old records equals trigger dot old, new record map and old record map. Okay. And that could work for us.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's, in other implementations, I'm just looking, for those wondering what I'm looking down at, I'm looking down at the version I've got in my book because I
crib notes.
Say again?
Crib notes.
My crib notes of this is what I actually wrote earlier. And in this one, I actually used the trigger context variables in the methods. Like, I don't do this kind of stuff we've got from lines 3 to 13 here because it's understood that the trigger handler has an idea. However, this is the better way of doing it, I think, because we're going through a slightly different route and path here than I was going through in the book. So I think we go with this, if you're happy with that.
Yeah, I think my preference would be to actually sort of pass the trigger object into the constructor again, just so there's like sort of a this is where it's coming from. Which
so you mean like
so that again, because that and this is again the personal preference that trigger object is it's available in the context and maybe it's okay to do it this way, but like I'd almost always rather see it.
Do you mean like that? I don't know if we can with trigger.
Can you not?
No, I don't think trigger's an object you can pass through.
Interesting. It must be an instance of something. I feel like I've done this before, but yeah, maybe
Let's have
not.
A look. Apex reference.
I mean, it couldn't be an instance of trigger. That I agree. That doesn't make sense. Trigger is an instance of itself. Interesting. Yeah, so maybe not.
Trigger class. Yeah, it's system.trigger then. So it should be
System.trigger. Okay. I feel like I'd done it. I just couldn't remember how.
Let's try system.trigger. Yeah, that's going to work.
Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, does that strike you as weird at all, or like overly?
No, it doesn't. I mean, it strikes me as weird that I have to declare it as system.trigger, but that to me just feels like it's going to like, whoa, no, like it's fine here, but like, no. I mean, is TGR a good enough variable? I think it's probably my biggest question. So let's do that then. And I like this. I do think this is abstracting it nicely. I suppose my my only other thought for testing is I would consider, because I think we've got a couple of possibilities here and paths we need to think of. Because when we're testing this, part of the reason I might not pass through system.trigger, or what I would do here is actually say add null thingies on all of these.
Mm-hmm.
That's the wrong way around, isn't it? It should be question mark dot.
I have to look it up every time. I've not used it enough that it's
unexpected token. Yeah. I mean, what I would do.
Yeah.
What I'd probably do is something like if TGR. Whoops, null. Because when we're testing this, we are not necessarily going to be in a trigger context.
Yeah, you're right.
So I would do that so that we can handle that instance. And then I would look at, when I'm updating my tests, maybe doing a test visible on these.
Okay, yeah.
Because in that way we can actually set some of these so they can be used elsewhere. Right. Again, given we're using aggregate queries, though, this limits our options because there's a bunch of things around this that we're coming up with examples here for us to test in this instance versus testing the task trigger handler, just to be clear. So let me just add these on because I think that they're going to be good for us for when we come to actually writing a test for this trigger framework. But I think that works as a good option for us. And then I think what we need to do in here is just understand that we need to remove. So, oops, someone press save.
Sorry, that was me. Oh, that's right. You do the I push on.
Yeah, I do the deploy on save thing. Sorry, Emma.
Sorry.
It's all right. So we do things like that where we have new records there. This would be new record map. Bum, 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 ba-dum, ba-dum.
Now we're also. So let me think about this. Are we going to need to do some casting?
Possibly.
Because new records it thinks its contents are S object as opposed to task.
Yes.
That?
So we're probably going to need to come in here and do things like,
Yeah.
and so for those that aren't familiar with casting, because someone spoke to me about that the other day saying they'd not seen this done before, is if you get a set of records that are of a higher level generic type, so kind of an interface or a type you want to extend, you can then cast as you need to this. That's why have we got that error?
It's something that like it feels annoying when you first like do it, because like can't it just figure out that like S object is a superclass of all the other S objects and then just like make it work? But then you work with something like JavaScript that has like these sort of very Byzantine rules about how to automatically do casting that come up with some really, really strange results if you like combine certain values together. And then you think to yourself, actually, I don't mind a language that forces me to like actually directly cast something to something else. So,
I agree. I mean, like, anytime I'm working with something that's dynamically typed like JavaScript and start casting things, I just want to cry.
Yeah. Now this is coming up with errors now, though, after my suggestion of casting. Why did it do that?
It's not the casting. The errors are all here because we can't pass through a trigger for some reason. It's one of those things I don't think we can do.
Okay. Well, then I guess we just have to handle.
Yeah, I mean, what we can.
I think maybe when I've done it before, I've manually passed like trigger.new or whatever.
Yeah. Let's just see if this works like this for now. I'm not sure we can have you can't. Yes, Paul. Don't be silly now. Can't use a variable that you haven't defined anywhere. So that's fine. I've realized what we've done wrong, though, here is we've got these as private, haven't we? And so there is another option.
Protected.
Yes. So what is protected, Pete?
Can I go look it up? It's slightly less protected than private.
So it's not private and it's not public.
Private only gives access to the class that the variable is declared in, and I'm guessing protected also at least surfaces it to any subclasses or other classes in the class hierarchy.
I think it's only immediate child classes, but yeah.
Okay, yeah. That would be like the details. And then this is like the Apex specific version, because then you get into like Java, and then it goes into like, the difference between private and protected, and starts to come down to like which package it's defined in and package visibility and stuff like that. So, which Apex doesn't really have. Well, it kind of does, but packages mean something different.
Yes. Why is it saying is closed does not exist on the task object?
Oh, interesting.
Old record map. Get task ID. That should get us a task, which is an IDS object, which I'm then casting to I've put the extra brackets in around it because I thought that was the reason it was erroring.
So this is new record map to TSK, and then we go to old record map. Is that cast to task in the right location?
Yeah, because I've got it around. I put the extra brackets around from there to there. So the old record map.get task. I mean, what we can do is just say, let's just do this if we wish.
Yeah, that would be.
I do find the casting can sometimes be just a bit
Finicky.
Yeah, just fiddly, and not as easy as one might like it to be.
I find, like, syntactically, I don't find it super intuitive when it gets to like you're stacking together a complex set of
there we go. Right,
incantations. I guess.
Oi.
Yeah, it should have worked, but yeah. Okay.
The reason it errored just then, for anyone watching at home and wondering, is because so I have it turned on to deploy on save, which I should turn off really for the stream whilst we're messing around. But I tried to save one class, the other class hadn't saved up, and so it can't see things, and so it then moans about it. I've got it set up like that because I do most of my work in Scratch orgs, where when you Control S, it will do a full check and do a sync save, whereas this is a developer org where it only does a file save.
Yeah. I wonder if like an extra set of brackets. I'm going to write myself a note to go and play around with why that casting didn't work. Like, anyway.
Yeah, I would love to know why.
Let's not belabor that point. That's good content right there. Why is my cast not work?
Yeah. Why? Where are my brackets? Hashtag developer life. All right. So, what I think we can do now is I'm just going to rerun the tests because I think it's again, to anyone who's newer at Salesforce, like in particular, but any developer really watching this, the biggest thing I can advise you to do is run your tests again and again and again, because we have a 0% pass rate now. So what is not working?
So that's fun.
Cannot insert execution before insert. Wow. Line method. Method does not exist after insert list of tasks. Do you know why this will be? Because what we've done is updated everything except our actual trigger code.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, that'll work well.
But again, this is a simple fix from doing it in a test. Imagine if you'd gone into your org and exploded in your face. So there we go. Beautiful pass. So we've done very little here to actually kind of get to the base trigger handler. But what we've done is we've taken. So let's just step back through this quickly so that people can understand what's going on. Before we show, there's a few more bits I think we can do in this that are going to show some extra information. So first thing we've done is we've created this virtual class, and the virtual class is going to allow us to have this class we can extend. Our trigger handler class we can extend. It's going to provide us some default methods here, which we'll actually see become far more useful in a minute. It's going to default our trigger variables, and we've also made them protected, so they're visible to our subclasses, and we've made them test visible as well, so that if we want to write a test for them, which of course we will do, whether we do it on air or off air afterwards, it means we can kind of set these things for us to have a simple test to work with. Okay. We've then gone over to our existing handler, and we've just effectively changed the signature up here to extend our trigger handler. We've changed our method signatures to be override. And I realized we did the override thing without really talking about what override means.
That's a good point. Should we come back to that when we finish the walkthrough and then come back?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we've gone through, we've changed the signatures, we removed the manual passing through here. And what we've done is we're using our protected variables. So new record map and old record map and new records. And we just made sure that everything's cast properly. And that's it. We haven't actually, the actual real logic here, which let's be clear is this stuff, hasn't been changed at all. Right. It's all exactly the same. And that's one of the nice things about this sort of framework, cool. Is it means that in here, you're really doing the little bit of work to access what you want to do in terms of your logic.
Yeah. So should we talk about override then?
Yes. Override. Excuse me. Pete, do you want to talk about override for 2 seconds? I'll have a sip of water and stop coughing.
You bet. So, yeah. So, we've gone to the trouble of having this superclass now where task trigger handler is a subclass. And then ostensibly any other objects that we want to implement trigger logic for, we implement a trigger, we call, trigger handler, and we're good to go, basically. So, but if we look at, if you go to trigger handler itself, we didn't define any logic in this virtual class because we don't know what it's going to be until we actually know which object we're working with. We don't know what fields it's going to have. And so task trigger handler, if let's say, that before insert method, if we look at task trigger handler, the override basically says, ignore what's in the superclass implementation of that method. When you see an instance of this and it calls before insert, use this local version of it, to use maybe not the best word, but the most descriptive word I can conjure up at this moment. Now, that's sort of a replace option. There's another thing that we could do if we have some logic in the superclasses method. So let's say maybe we want to do logging every time we invoked one of these methods, but we didn't want to implement that logging. We could actually maybe put that log call in the trigger handler, and there we go. And now you might be asking yourself, but when we override this, aren't we replacing this? Yes, we are. And that's where you can go back to the subclass, and right at the first line, you can call the super method. And so by calling super, it's going to go back and execute all the logic of the superclasses method and then your logic. And I believe the rules for super is it always has to be the first thing that happens in a subclasses method, because you don't want it to sort of like mix and match where things are going. So if you're going to implement superclass logic, you have to make sure that you are doing everything that would need to happen before the subclasses logic. You can't sort of mix and match the order of execution there.
No. Sorry, I went and put it on the after insert one as well, as I realized we haven't actually implemented before insert in this one.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for catching my, Anyway, good call.
This, in fact, and the call to super must be the first statement in a constructor method.
Oh, thank you.
Oh yeah, no, you can't do super on.
Is there no way to do that in a? You're right.
No, it's only constructors, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Never mind.
Yes.
Peter's wires are crossed on when that super method is called.
I think that what you're looking at is doable in other languages, and this is one of the kind of the conundrums of working in many languages. Is you often find yourself going like, wait, that's not a thing.
Can you do super dot before insert? Does that work? Or sorry, after insert?
There you go. That's
I knew there was a way. Okay.
All right, let me just add these back in then.
Sometimes I don't know what I know. What can I say?
Yeah, as I say, like there's a load of stuff here that for anyone watching along, again, this is really important for you to remember. Like you'll forget a ton of stuff. You'll need to go away and look at it and think about things. Doing it on a live stream where Pete and I will just like, try it and fail, because we know in the back of our minds somewhere it's like, yeah, you can do super classic and there's inheritance that's properly in there.
Like that's totally how I code now. It's like, okay, I think it's this, and then it's like, okay, no, it wasn't that. So what is it?
Yeah.
And half the time, just sort of like feeling your way through, you find it, or like something like that happens. You're like, oh, I didn't remember that quite right, or I got it confused with the actual super method that works in the constructor. Anyway, so yeah. So, and actually to that point, like if you have a superclass constructor that needs to get some work done before your subclass constructor, same thing. So that's what that super method is for. So
yeah. I'm just trying to quickly run the tests and open up a. Here we go. You just forgive me a sec. So what I'm going to do real quick. So we've got after insert called here. What I'm going to do in our one here is then just put in another system debug method here.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Okay. So what we should see is after insert called and then after insert child. Okay. And so if I'm just going to stop sharing real quick while I hop over to another screen for you, which is this one. The developer console, the first place you will find everything.
It is still the easiest place to do this, in my opinion.
Debug logs are just, I mean, I try and tail them out a lot, but it just often isn't as easy as one would like. Yeah. Right. Cool. And so this is the debug log for running all those tests. And when we turn debug only, insert called, after insert child, and blah, 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 blah. So you can see that it's calling the parent and then the child method. Okay.
Yep. Nice.
What a nice little visual representation that was for us.
So there we go. So that's override. So where are we going next? We've got our trigger handler superclass.
Yes, I'm just going to remove our debugging because I like to keep things tidy.
That's fine.
So the next thing I would like us to kind of talk about is I think we've got too much logic here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so what I think we should do is I would like us in our trigger handler class to have a method called run.
Okay. Yeah.
And what I'm going to suggest we do is let's just, first of all, I mean, we can be very lazy and just cut that out.
Right.
We'll come back to that in a second. And we can do the same thing here as we were doing beforehand. So we can say, and we'll just implement all of them real quick because it's going to take us 2 seconds before. And we don't have to use handler anymore. We can just call after insert. Yep, go away.
Yep. Yeah.
Agent calls for developers. So we've got before, we have.
So before and after insert, before and after delete. Okay, I'll do
update 1 sec. Before update. I don't know why it's taking forever to save. So we've got before insert, before update, after update.
Oh, here we
go. We've got after update.
And so this should be before delete.
And I'll do the bottom one, which is after undelete.
Okay.
Cool. And we've got an empty when else block. I'm going to remove that.
Yeah, that was sort of there's really no reason you should ever get here. And if you do, that's a problem. But it's problematic.
You just put a big error in there that says, "What are you doing?" Throw new exception. You messed it up.
The universe has turned itself inside out. Yeah, there's no reason code should ever get there. So
there we go. So this is our updated code now to have handler.run there. And if we save all of this, voila, we now have a much leaner trigger. So again, just a quick run of our tests to make sure that everything's all okay. Perfect. But yeah, this is where kind of I think this to me is where you want to get to as a baseline with your framework, where you can just say, look, we have we know what we're just instantiating our new trigger and we're going to run it. And if I come into this as a developer, I can, I know what my triggers do. I know what my trigger is. It's a trigger on task. I can see that it's covering all the different options, and I can go here and I go, immediately I go, great. I need to open up my trigger handler, and I go to the task trigger handler, and I can just find the method I want.
Right.
And that just makes it so much nicer and quicker, I think. And just gives us less logic everywhere. We've got that logic once now. So, because one of the problems with having it in the task trigger here is that when we did a new trigger, we would then have to create a new bit of logic to do a new thing. And we don't want to.
And I think this also nicely illustrates the whole, the advantage of using the object-oriented structure to our advantage, because this run method, we're writing it once, and however many objects we ever need to to create trigger logic for, we never need to ever worry about creating that boilerplate logic of when it's this runtime context, go and do this thing. And when it's this runtime context, go and do this other thing. Like, that's all built in. You just have to implement, the method that represents that particular phase of trigger execution.
Exactly. And I think, let's, what I'd like to do real quick as another thing to show us here is let's create a trigger quickly on account, just to highlight exactly what you've just said. So this is a trigger, and I'm just going to copy this because I'm lazy and I'm not going to type all of those out again. But
nor should you.
So if we change that to account, so what we would need to do here in our process is we create a class and we call it account trigger handler. And we already know we're just going to extend trigger handler. And what I'm going to do is the most simple of methods, just as an example. So we're going to do public override void. We're going to do before insert. And we're going to do for account ACC in account list account. Sorry. New records. And then we're just going to do okay. And that's like it.
There you go.
Actually, I tell you what I'm going to do is something even more ridiculous than that. We're just going to put the name in the description field. Right? And the reason for that is because what I'm going to do quickly is, me. I don't like to test via the UI the first time. Wait, what? Cute. So acc.name equals, we'll go for dummy. Insert acc. And then we go description from account. Limit 1. And then system dots are equal acc.name Right. And in theory, based upon our code, this should all work. So in our trigger handler here, we just do, in our trigger, sorry, we do account, trigger handler, new account, trigger handler, handler.run. Whoops, you had a semicolon there and it might actually work. Let me cancel that and try again. Apologies. That is me with my fast fingers. Incorrect. There we go. All deployed successfully. And we can run this very, very detailed test and see it worked. And that's, yeah, I mean, that was what, about a minute's work, I know, and it's the stupidest simple method, but it gives us, again, for anyone coming in, it means that they look at this trigger and they go, aha, they're using the framework, I know what I'm doing. And all of the plumbing, we've just not had to bother with here. It just works for us out of the box.
Right. Yeah,
So,
it's nice. It's almost
so
like
that,
I appreciate too, like sort of walking through and having the tests in place like straight away, as
yeah,
just I don't need to like log into my org and go and test this out and add an account. I can just run tests, and if I've written
yeah.
my tests correctly, like so you may actually win me over to moving more in the TDD direction with some of this stuff. It's good.
Yeah. I mean, we're one of the things that I know we've said at some point we might actually kind of go through and discuss is the concept of because this test is that one of the interesting things we've done with our trigger handler framework is actually made it possible to write this test without actually doing any without doing this insertion. Because what we could
Right.
do here is if I did the following.
You need a variable name for that one.
I do, don't I? That's always a good idea. Just like to add labels on things. I like to leave them, let it identify as it wishes to, be itself.
Let that runtime hunt around in memory to try and find it.
Exactly. So because this is because we marked everything as test visible, we should be able to do this. He says. This is where we find out this does not work, but this will be fun for us to bottom out. And then we can do yeah. And then what we could do here is go back and say, okay, well, and in theory, that should be exactly the same.
Yeah,
what we've not done is done the actual database invocation. So let's try it. I'm not necessarily sure we've got the visibility correct. Variable does not exist name, variable does not exist description. That's probably because these, let's just do, let me undo what I've just done and we'll see why. It's casting. That should be, I think it's this way. Try that. There we go. Because handler.new records was returning a list of S objects, not accounts. It was then upset about that. So if we run this test, oh, and it's failed. Expected dummy, actual null. So it hasn't looped over that. Why not?
Let's see. Yeah.
Is that because it's no, it's test visible. It's fine. Otherwise, it wouldn't have let us set it.
Yeah. All right. So.
It has no context. Does it? Run is not going to run anything because it doesn't know what context it's in.
Yeah, exactly. You're right.
So,
I was kind of thinking about that, but yeah.
So what we can do here is nice and easily say because this here is an enum which is system.trigger operation there, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So again, context we'll call it for terrible naming. And then we can just pop that in there. And in our handler again, to was it I'm gonna forget it. Was it trigger.operation trigger.operation type?
I thought it was operation type.
Yeah, no, it is. I just there you go. So that should work. And this means we can go back here, though, again in our test and say dot context. And I can never forget these. Trigger dot operation type. Trigger dot operation dot before insert. Yeah.
This is before insert. Yeah.
And that was what I had in the So let's try saving that. Ooh, variable does not exist. Trigger dot operation 11 line 11. Try that. Nope, that's not gonna work. What am I doing daft here?
Well, so trigger.operation type is a variable name, not operation. I don't know if that's
yes, but I'm trying to set it here
yeah.
using a specific one.
And the actual context variable.
I think it's called trigger context, is it not? Just think a minute.
Trigger operation, enum. The name of the enum type is trigger operation.
Like that, or you mean trigger operation?
Maybe that would be my guess.
Nope.
No. Is it just trigger or system.trigger operation? System.trigger operation. Yep. It's not. It hangs off of system, not off of trigger.
Okay, that'll be it then. Yeah, variable does not exist context, and this is my whole deployment issue again. I don't think we need to change anything else. There we go. So yeah, for those, this is a live coding brain freeze. So we want the trigger operation type of before insert to go into the context, which will go on here. And then we'll be able to have that run.
And I think this is a good one to like go back, just sort of step through what you just went through and a bit more why, because I think this is absolutely one of those, there are multiple right answers. You know, there's there are some wrong answers, maybe, but like, do you test and do you test against what's essentially a mock value, or do you test against the actual trigger execution? And what's the, you know, when do you do one versus the other? Like those are, I
Yeah.
think, really important things to tease out of what you just did. Um,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So let's step back through that because yeah, you're right. I think I whizzed through that a little bit. So
yeah, so start with like, okay, so the first way that we got this done was you get a record to be saved, boom, and
and
that
that's
triggers your trigger and everything
that's
runs
still
as it
what we're
should.
doing on the task here.
Yeah,
So the
exactly.
task one is still doing that. Speaking and there's a and yeah, sorry. So the original sorry, Pete, for talking over you there.
No, it's okay.
The the original way we were testing this, as you correctly point out, is like we were doing in our task trigger, where we're actually getting a record to save against the database that causes the trigger to fire, which is over here. That then runs our account trigger handler and it runs our code here. And then we retrieve the updated data from the database and verify it. And that's our
Right,
kind of very standard loop and is exactly, as I say, what we're doing in our task trigger here. What I've done is I've said, well, one of the things that we now have in our trigger handler is we've got all the logic here that says what method it's calling.
right.
And why wouldn't we call just the method we want? Now, I think if we really wanted to here, instead of calling handle.run, we could probably just, because it's public, just call handle.before insert. And
Sure.
this would
Yeah.
have
Yep.
exactly the same option here. What we're doing is we're actually exercising a bit more of the logic. But yeah, let's, again, just for completeness and to show everyone, if we do this and run the test, this should also still run fine and pass. There you go, passed okay.
And
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 that
I
would have
think,
been,
that would be acceptable because, as long as you're testing that switch statement logic, you
oh
know,
yeah,
for each outcome once, do you have to do it every single time? Like, why would you want to do it every single time?
yeah, you wouldn't. Like,
Yeah,
you would, one of the things we should do, and we'll probably looking at the time do is like something afterwards, is for us to write just a little test class for this where
for that one. Yeah.
we would go in and if you're doing this, you'd probably write a test class where you go in, you set these context variables, and you go through and you verify that it will run all of the different methods. But what we've done here is let's just I'm going to go back to we'll keep it with this by running this method by calling it imperatively, by explicitly saying I want to run this method, we are avoiding the need to go and save to the database. Now, I have a love and hate relationship with this method of testing. I genuinely do. The love part is that if we're doing something more complex here and can get away with it, and let's just say that we were working in an org where we have another developer working, and they have a bunch of complex logic in their work. Let's just say that they've built a very complicated. I'm gonna say a very complicated flow, and this is not me picking on flow, but it is much easier and far more common, I think, to see very complex flow logic that can be slow rather than complex Apex logic that slows down. Apex tends to be a little bit leaner and meaner in general. But various different logic, you could have various packages all firing off on the account. Yeah.
You're going to set off a flame war by that one statement, but
Yeah, but so I mean, we can go into that separately. But I do
no,
think
that's okay. I'm just
I do
teasing.
think in general you're more likely to see some flow run slower than Apex in general.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it
And
might.
I'm teasing a bit because I think it was just like a month ago that there was this huge flame
Oh
out
yeah.
that happened between like, the
Listen,
somebody
the
uh,
only thing that really works is workflow rules. Like anything else is just superfluous.
honestly, I love workflow rules and I still I get why Salesforce would retire them, but at the same time, they're so simple and straightforward and bulletproof. If you have like a really simple automation to run, I'm
I mean,
sad
what
they're
I
gone.
what I do now is I just hire a bunch of cheap interns to sit there constantly refreshing list views, see that a record's changed, and then they have to go in and use the field history to then decide what changes to make manually. It's just much quicker and easier. So creating value jobs.
There we go. Yeah.
You know,
Training
we're
those
all being
interns for like really important work in the future.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, my view is that as developers and everyone else are being replaced by agents and like AI, I'm going to
Yeah.
replace basic process automation by humans and just kind of come at it from the reverse.
So okay. So you're fighting back. I get
Yeah,
it.
exactly. Like this is it. If you think that like AI is gonna replace like the difficult bits at the top, I'm like no, I'm gonna replace the easy bits at the bottom.
There we go.
Thus,
Yeah.
it's like a circular economy is what I'm going to call
So
it.
that's it, that is some like art of war level like
Yeah,
ground
4D
game theory
chess.
and tactics there, Paul. So well
Yeah,
done. Well done.
yes, it's we all mutually assured destruction, a la Starfleet Academy
That's right.
style. Um,
Yeah. You,
so
you and Sun Tzu, like right up there. So
just there, yes, yeah. If you think just outsmart your enemy by just all these AI bots, go like, what? Why are you doing this? Like, nope, that's it. So I was gonna make a terrible pun then of saying most people are doing cloud computing. I'm doing crowd computing, which is just a crowd of people sat around doing my work for me.
There we go.
So with this, what we're saying is that
There's no crowd computing. It's just someone else on my keyboard. Is that?
it is? Yes, yeah. It's Claude. It's Ratty just going away and doing it for you.
Rhodey.
Rhodey the rat.
I was thinking
Rhodey.
about it. I think this guy back here, I'm going to call Yorick, just as a shout out to a little bit of Shakespeare there. So,
Alas. So what we're trying to do here is not save to the database. And if we were in an org where we had a couple of managed packages that had stuff on the account, we had our own logic, whether it is Flow, whether it's Apex, whatever it is, whether it's workflow rules, whether it's interns, whatever, that's all going to take time and will slow our tests down and really is superfluous to what our logic does. So here we're literally isolating and testing just our logic and just that our logic runs. This is really the purest definition of a unit test you can get in Salesforce.
Right. Cool. Yeah. No, I mean that makes a lot of sense, and I think that until you've gone through a deployment process that takes a long time because of how long tests are running, you may not appreciate how valuable it is to be able to essentially bypass a little bit of the overhead that entails. If in fact you are essentially doing the true version of the test versus the sort of mocked one. So
now I'm going to tell you now why I hate this because
I was waiting for it. Yep.
Well, no. So like I am in general a proponent of testing. I'm in general a proponent of testing against the database. I would rather do the insert and retrieve than go away and just do this.
And
a couple of reasons for it. Why is that? It's because I just like an argument. No, it's because I'm a heathen. No, the actual reason is that I have seen. I'm going to retract myself. I think that I prefer testing against the database in my consulting work for definite. I think I prefer mocking or using this sort of setup in ISV work more generally if I don't know that I have exclusive access to the object.
Yep. Okay, that makes sense.
Now, the reason being is that in consulting work or in an org that you own and manage yourself, if you're a developer and end user, you need to know if something else is going to break this. Because I've written this code now. Now, let's say that Rhodey didn't like me and wanted to make sure that everything I'd ever written failed because he's a rat. See what I did there? That was quite good, I thought.
Yeah, that's good.
And like Rhodey goes into the background and he creates a workflow rule, a process builder, if he's old school, a flow, any number of things, another trigger, And what he does is he says that whatever value's in the description field, set it to blank.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And or he might remove permissions from that field so no one can see it. He might do a bunch of things. And what I want to test is that my code actually runs. Not that in theory, I mean, like, the code I've written will run. Whether it does what I expect it to or not, I can verify and test. But what I really want to check is that will it work for my end user?
Right.
That's what you should care about. Like, and the testing performance speed argument I get, but you should be able to run your tests here quite quickly and like even if your org is slow on your tests, that's a smell that there's something wrong. We've discussed this before. Like we talked about code smell and what was it, org smell and
org smell.
All of these things. So I think that there's that there. But more importantly is that if you should only really be running like a couple of tests at a time, like in your trigger that you're working with.
Right.
You should run your tests overnight. Tests now run in parallel. They're far more performant than they were. Like I used to work at one of probably the largest, if not one of the largest ISVs many years ago, where running all tests genuinely took 8 hours. Like, and this was back in the day, like before, like serial parallelization of tests. We would start them and go. I'd literally leave the office at night and start the test running in an all tests, and come back in the morning. And there were some mornings when they hadn't even finished yet.
Well, right? Yeah,
it was slow. But the reason that was not Salesforce was slow. Truth be told, part of the reason was that is that our tests had issues with them, and we were doing a lot of extra sort of gumpy work and had a lot of extra, code and enterprise patterns and things like that in there that often were just slowing us down and weren't needed in certain instances. Like so we had rewritten parts of the UI and thus had to do a bunch of controller work that we shouldn't be needing to do or testing.
Yeah, and what it sounds like to me is, so I could go and write this kind of tests, right? And let's say I've run the tests, it's gone through my developer org, it's gone through, test, UAT, whatever, and then it goes into production and then it fails because of, one of those things that you said where, some direct production change is made, a change to a permission, a validation rule, whatever thing has been sort of sprinkled onto the org that makes this slight behavior change fail, right? Or maybe even deploy successfully because my test worked, but then it doesn't work for the end user. It's almost the Apex / Salesforce version of, well, it worked on my machine, right?
That is it. And
then we're back in the silos of, exactly the thing that frustrates everybody, which is like, well, I did my job. It's not my problem. And actually, it doesn't, if it doesn't work for the user, you didn't do your job,
That's my biggest gripe. And the hill I will die upon, like, is that, and this goes for like, at some point we'll sit down and do a proper conversation with someone who really gets mocking frameworks and is big into them. And I do really need to sit down and write a blog post around some of this stuff. But the real reason I'm so against them is that they're a tool for developers. They're not actually, like, everything we do needs to be valuable for the user, not for anyone else. Like, if you and I could sit here and write the best code in the world that passes all the tests and doesn't touch the database and is abstracted and has, everything going on for, excuse me, for it. But if it goes into an org and it doesn't work for the user, and we can't verify that it's going to work for the user actually with everything else in there, then we've got a problem. Now,
whereas if we've actually written the test that is executing the trigger, then the minute you go and deploy it in that org that has that change to it, that test will fail and it won't deploy, and you won't end up with a problem in production.
Yeah. Now, I want to go back to what I said at the start, though, where I changed my mind about different for ISV packages,
which I totally get. And so please, go further on that.
So, I have an ISV package, which is a messaging app system, right? And I actually run my tests in that primarily against the database still because of what I'm doing. But I do not have control over any of the objects, any of the logic, any of the permissions, anything in a customer's environment.
Right.
When they install the app, I do not know what's going on. Now, I can write all my tests in my org, and when you install an app, you don't necessarily need to worry so much because the tests aren't going to block it as much. But you want to make sure that you're not thinking as hard about the end user's environment and not requiring specific environment setup. And that's why I think as an ISV, you can have a certain level of abstraction and removal from it that you might want to enable that to be easier. So that if your tests are run in that environment, which they can be, they're not going to cause a blockage, they're not going to cause a problem. And you tend to have a different kind of development life cycle and methodology in general. I think ISV development and consulting development is different on that front.
Yeah.
For
And
just
that lack of visibility to, what the destination org or the installation org looks like is, I think, to me, like that's like such the important distinction.
it means you just got to code a lot more defensively than
Mhm.
you would do otherwise. And yeah, we've done a few bits here where we've coded quite defensively just to ensure that we've got what we need. When we were doing this year, we're expecting things, but we've made sure that things are protected. We've made sure that things have got the right scope on there. Like, we're not doing things that are just willy nilly for us.
Right.
But yeah, I'm a big fan of both types of tests. I did a talk at, in fact, my first Dreamforce talk in 2014, 2012, something like that, was on mocking frameworks. Like, I worked with Carolina Ruiz to build out a little mocking framework called Pepino, which will allow you to do BDD and kind of work on that front. And it was a nice little proof of concept, and we used it in a couple of bits of pieces and work. But again, like, if you're working in a customer's org and you're live coding against it effectively, so if you're doing a consulting gig or you're an end user, check against the database. If you're an ISV, it's a different ball game, and you need to think differently. But that would be, or if you're working in maybe one of the bigger, I've worked with some very big enterprisey customers where mocking and but at that point, enterprise patterns and different ways of thinking become important as well. Like, there is no one size fits all.
I think there was another point that you had made in the past. It just went through my mind. There's another point you made in the past about sort of the importance of actually running it through the database.
Speed.
There. No, it wasn't speed. It was something else. But anyway, if it comes back, that's fine. But I think that's no, that's great. I think that really.
The other one I normally make is like that. Part of the point I had that I normally make as well in kind of previous rants. For long-time viewers, you'll know about all my rants. Is that it's that thing of if your end user's sat there waiting for it to run.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you think your test is slow, your code is slow. If your code is slow, it's killing your end user. There's some poor person sat there waiting for it. A lot of developers don't test in the UI still.
Right.
Yeah. But it probably wasn't that. But yeah, we'll think. I'm sure it'll pop in there in a minute.
Yeah, it'll come back. That's fine.
So I think we've got about 10 minutes left. And so I think for 5 of these, what I think would be good just to do is talk about, so this is the end of, I think, of our trigger framework. I think we've got a trigger framework. I think it works. I think there's some stuff we could add to it. But what I'd like to spend 5 minutes just doing is talking about some of the things you could do if you wish to, that are in other frameworks and other options that we are not going to implement here, and we're not going to do. This is the purpose of this, and I hope what people have learned over the past 6 hours, aside from our ranting, is that thought process that gets you from a trigger to here. Because I think that's really what the focus has been. I hope people have enjoyed that. The other things you could look at adding here, which we've mentioned, are metadata, custom metadata, to turn things on and off declaratively. So as you start running a trigger, have it check in the background whether or not the metadata is saying to run that trigger. So there's a bit of work to set that up where you have a custom metadata record for each class, for each trigger handler, and you have some, effectively a series of checkboxes. You retrieve that metadata record, and what it means though is if you want to do a big data load and you don't want to set the account's description to be the account's name for every single account you're inserting,
Right. Yeah.
you can do that. And that's really important if you're working in a big org where you got I had one company once where I had to load in 20 million records. Like, you don't want your trigger running every single time for that. Like, you'll crazy.
Yeah. Talk about taking like 8 hours. That took take like 8 days or something like that.
Yeah, they can take forever. So that is one option there. Bypassing is another option in the code. Dan Appleman in his Advanced Apex program has a really good section talking about bypassing the handler.
Okay.
And there's two reasons you might do that. Excuse me. Sorry, I should have muted there. There's two reasons you might do that off the top of my head. One is if you wish to not run the logic multiple times. So again, recursion is a thing. It's it's a big problem. I'm going to say it again. Recursion is a thing. That's a very poor recursive joke there. But I know. Sorry, Pete. But you might not want the trigger running many times. So you can have an incrementer and a bypass bit of logic that says, if I've already run, don't run again.
Right.
And that's doable. You might also just want to be able to programmatically say, don't run this trigger in certain instances.
Yeah, and that's a fairly tried and tested technique.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something that's been around for a while. And I would just, presumably in an instance like that, since you're doing the data load, like, where possible, you're sort of replacing the calculated value that, any calculated values that might have been derived in the trigger and just making sure they're loaded with the data where possible, like that sort of thing.
Yeah. And there's a lot of instances where, again, you one of the things I've seen is there's two approaches sometimes to data loading large stuff, where one is that you kind of want it to go through the life cycle to verify that things are happening properly and that things are going to end up in the right state. And another example is where you just say, I know that the data is in the right state, get it in, and this is kind of a clean day zero start, as it were. And I think that's a decision you've got to make and will help you determine what you turn on or turn off.
Right.
Yeah, those are the big things I think we could add to the system. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head.
Yeah, no.
I'm sure there are, though. And if for people watching on now or watching afterwards, feel free to comment below. Let us know if there's anything you think else people might want to add in or could learn from that's in there. But that is a trigger handler framework, I think.
There you go.
End to end. So I hope people have found this useful, and I hope people have learned, kind of more importantly, the why and the how, rather than just like the what a trigger handler framework is, if that makes sense.
I think for me, what's helpful is, there tends to be a fair amount of complexity in probably the most popular trigger handler frameworks, or sorry, trigger frameworks that get bandied about there. And going through an example like this takes the trigger framework down to a more minimal level where, like I could see if I was working on a project and I knew I was going to be sort of long term with this customer, and I was, like maybe doing sort of like fractional work for them and coming back and doing some work, off and on over the course of a year or years. This gives me, a structure that I'm going to be really familiar with. I can easily extend it. I have, like you showed, I have kind of a fairly straightforward way to go in and add the tests, a fairly straightforward way to add a new object. I could even, sort of block and tackle, let's say I'm going to bite off a larger project and maybe there's, triggers on 4 or 5 different objects that I know I'm going to implement. I could kind of do the blocking and the tackling of the actual trigger handler for for each object,
Mhm.
in kind of a very basic form, that's just using the superclass method. So I could almost implement nothing, no logic, no even methods in it initially. And I've got those pieces in place, you know, or if I was working in a team and maybe I'm more of a lead developer and I want to get everything in place for my juniors to go and work on, I get those empty trigger handlers in place. And then I say, okay, like now you're going to go implement the account logic. You're going to implement the request logic. You're going to implement the case logic. You're going to implement the um, contact logic, etc. And then, I don't have to worry about there being some kind of variance in like what's the name of the class going to be, or is it going to be what I want. I can kind of put the basic shape of the
Mm.
project in place and then kind of give that to some more junior developers to go and work on.
Yeah,
So I can see
definitely.
I see a lot of advantages that you get while still having something that isn't as complex as, say, um, the fflib, or something really
Yeah,
big
yeah.
that
Like,
has a lot of complexity.
well, one of the things I was going to add on to that, which I think is kind of an in general thing, is the code we've written here is working code, and the trigger handlers are, a fairly robust trigger handler. It's a simple one, but it's a robust one.
Mhm,
I would highly encourage anyone who is looking to add a trigger handler to go and look at Kevin O'Hara's, to look at Aidan Harding's that we've just mentioned, to look at one that is built and established and released and has been used for a long time. I
mhm,
have a little set of resources that every company I go into, I will deploy 9 times out of 10. And
mhm.
that is things like Kevin O'Hara's one, because I've used it for a long time. I'm familiar with it. I'm comfortable with it. Um, and, I've got some utility classes I've written over the years and I have in there and things like that. And excuse me, the take home of this should not be go away and write your own trigger framework every time.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
should be you now understand why it's there, how
Mhm.
we've got there, and hopefully, more importantly, have seen the thought processes around refactoring and testing and why we do these things in that setup as we've gone. So that now when you go into an org and see it, you actually understand better what it's doing and why it's doing it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
rather than needing to think about adding these things in, because it's there to help you be more productive.
There you go.
Super. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for watching. Thank you, Pete, and thank you, Rody, for being here and helping along. Um, we will be back in 2 weeks' time to start yet another topic to go
Which
through
we've
all the
not
code for
decided
this.
yet.
We
Yeah.
haven't decided just
If
yet. Well, I've got a couple of ideas. There's a few interesting pieces I think we could do
if
on there.
there's
But if you
something,
have any ideas,
yeah, exactly. If someone who's listening to this like has an idea or has heard of something that's a more complex, something we can sink our teeth into over the course of several live streams, definitely let us know.
yes, yeah, let us know. If you've enjoyed it. Please let us know. If you hated it, also let us know. Again, I'm going to apologize again for the coughing throughout. I will get over COVID fully, I promise. But until then, you
In
have no
time.
choice of either me being here and having an occasional cough, or just no streams at all. So we'll have to live with that one.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you everyone for watching, and we'll catch up with you in 2 weeks' time. Cheers,
Thanks
everyone. Bye.
everyone. Bye.